Alright, doing another DraftScience physics video. It looks like they're working on the road, actually. Have the tree cut down anyway, so progress. Might not mean it still might be another day, and then there's more snow coming, which is just great. Wednesday, another big giant pile of shit. Anyway, see what happens.
Bait defenders of current physics. Well, he doesn't. He wants to debate his furry world.
Right, so I've offered this idea that I'm willing to discuss physics with anybody who's willing to discuss it. So anybody who wants to defend the conventional model, and I'll reserve my comments to the conventional model. I mean, I'm perfectly willing just to discuss the weakness of your evidence without even proposing the idea that, yes, there might be alternative explanations than bent space for the existence of the inverse square law, for example. If I'm not even allowed to mention the fact that, yes, there are models that can explain it, and there's models that are really good at explaining charge, for example, and it doesn't rely on spinning electrons. How would spin mean anything unless the two things actually interact in some way and then bounce off spinning, and that would create all kinds of different kinds of momentum that we don't actually see in the real world. No, I'm perfectly willing to just discuss the conventional model and the incredibly pitiful evidence you have to defend this monstrosity you've built on top of monstrosity.
Conception of physics. If you talk to him about a model of orthodox current day science and thinking, best models that we have and believe in,
that we believe in, again, best models, string theory, multiverses, you got all kinds of models, all kinds of theories, Copenhagen, all kinds of different interpretations. I mean, this is bullshit to say we have a model and it's this good solid model. You have models where Feynman speculates about electrons borrowing themselves from the future and the past. The same electron was involved in every single interaction that ever took place in the universe. You have all kinds of wacky nonsense that's all molded into this thing that's called your standard model of woo and bullshit.
Accepting some flaws, many flaws in some models.
Yeah, so you're conceding it's flawed, you're conceding that, yeah, well, there's some problems it creates, there might be some paradoxes even, the thing doesn't create very good unification, there's no linearity to it, it gets insanely complex because you place mathematics on top of mathematics on top of mathematics, and everybody's supposed to just say, trust me. Trust me, we did the right math to create this gravitational wave thing. Yes, of course we assume that photons are time dilated and they're in the gravity twice as long. Sure, we did that. And yeah, we made up this new idea where you convert mass into some kind of bent spacey wavy thing that really doesn't have anything to do with any kind of physics anybody ever heard of. I mean, look, there's plenty to argue about your standard model as just being based on a bunch of just open speculation, because the guy who said it has a pocket protector, and he did some math challenging math questions once. He maybe he came in second place on Jeopardy, and all of a sudden you trust everything that comes out of their mouths. I mean, you are a religion.
And accepting that there are other models, but the orthodox main models, which we have confidence in the utility. And
again, confidence in the utility. There's no utility to this stupid dark matter. There's no utility to the dark energy. There's no utility to even the Higgs boson. Where's your utility? This is just so bullshit. Everything that's been advancements are advancements because people tinker with the toy. You know what I'm saying? They have an electron microscope and they say, well, what if I do this? And what if I do that? And that's how most of the improvement happens, and you know it.
Teach at university, etc. If we want to talk about those models in Mendham, DraftScience will say he wants to talk about them and argue with you defending those models.
Yes, exactly. I'm perfectly willing to have an argument exclusive to the poor evidence you have for these bold claims. You're claiming all kinds of UFOs, all kinds of functions that photons have, all kinds of magic they can perform, and yet you have pitiful evidence that any of that is true. A tiny, minute number of experiments that allow you to have this conversation at all. I mean, we're here now, we got neutrinos flying around, we got all kinds of new eccentric particles doing all antiparticles all over the place, all kinds of stuff, yet there's absolutely no evidence in the real world that any of that crap exists. Not one bit. How can you have an antiparticle has the same substance as the other particles, and yet somehow they navigate through our atmosphere without interfering with us at all? It doesn't make any sense. The whole theory is nonsense.
And yet he won't. He wants to argue about the fairy tale models in his own mind.
No, let's argue about virtual photons as an explanation of magnetism and electricity. Let's argue about, well, how does polarization happen? How do the magnetic poles have exactly opposite identities? What's your explanation of the Standard Model? Oh, that's right, you don't have an explanation. Zero explanation. No explanation of charge whatsoever. The force carrier of charge. Even if you invent virtual photons, you haven't invented them polarized, so you're still dead in the water in terms of explaining why magnets attract or why magnets repel. You still have no explanation. I have an explanation, a nice, simple, mechanical explanation.
It's clear as day in the two examples which have been long running here on DraftScience's channel. They're on DraftScience's channel. I say, orthodox science says, you can't aim a photon.
Alright, it's just silly, right? I mean, a laser beam does it all the time. Obviously, and even a light bulb does it in the sense that exactly the same amount of light comes out of each side, and it's all kind of proportional. Clearly, all those, we have clear expectations about what photons will do when they're emitted. They don't come out of the back end of the LED, they come out of the front end. We have lots of control over where the photons are released and what vector they have when they are released. So it's just nonsense to say we have no aiming control. We have lots of aiming control. What we can't do is put them through tiny, tiny apertures and use an aperture as a filter. You can't filter light with an aperture. That doesn't work. But there's lots of other mechanisms and ways of aiming photons without using an aperture.
You can't aim an electron very well. Okay?
Yeah, I've already stated that loud and clear. All right, and it's because electrons have a function that you're not accounting for. You don't even know what they are. Okay, you don't have a model of their function. Therefore, you don't even know why they behave the way they do. I have the explanation again. You don't.
Says the harder you try to aim it, the more it will become unaimed.
Alright, that's not what, there's no law that says that. Again, this just has to do with apertures. It just has to do with small spaces, using small spaces to filter things. You can't use a small aperture because it distorts, it causes interference with it interferes with the matter. The matter has energy around it, force, and that force affects the path of the photon or the electron. So yeah, you can't use an aperture as an aiming device, but then you can, yes, you can know where the photons are going. Like I said, we know where 99% of these laser photons are going to go. Quite reliably. Over many meters of distance I can shoot it, and 99% of them will be in a very tight range of probability. None of them are going to Pluto. None of them will go to Mars. That's your fantasy.
Bendham's answer to this question is but in reality, can't you tell me if you did aim it and you could aim it? He just cannot get his head around that. That is not engaging with the theory.
Alright, so again, he's stating, so he's not only incapable of paraphrasing my theory correctly, he can't even get conventional physics correct. Because there's nothing wrong with aiming. It's just you can't use a small aperture to filter. You can't use an aperture to do your aiming. You can't use the muzzle of the gun to aim the bullet. You have to aim it with some other device.
Now he can say, yes, you can aim it, that's fine. I can't stop him saying you can aim it. We'll go make an experiment, find some evidence to show that that's true, because all the experiments show that it fit with this model, which works.
Well, again, laser beams are now, cheap LED ones are doing a reasonable job of aiming it. But the higher end lasers do a really good job of creating pretty much parallel light. So again, it's just bullshit to say we can't. Yes, we can.
Assumption you can't aim them, right? So to ask me to explain what will happen is to essentially be married to Newtonism, right? That's where he is. Yeah,
so again, this maligning of Newtonism, where Newtonism only missed on the speed of light, okay, and recognizing the concept of induction, that the movement of one body is causing the movement of the other, and they're feeding each other's force. So that was Newton's big error 300 years ago. The guy figured out so fucking much, and these idiots malign that as a good starting position. And instead they go with some idiotic notion that physics started with the Young experiment, which totally denied the existence of Newton's discovery. So let's pretend Newton didn't already figure out what small apertures do, and let's think it's all of a sudden a new thing. Oh, look at that, there's a bar pattern, where did that come from? Like it's a new miracle. This is, you know, it's laughable how ludicrous this physics is.
He's married to Newtonian physics and will not relinquish it.
There's nothing to relinquish. Newton wasn't wrong about anything. He just wasn't complete. So go ahead and point out where Newton was actually wrong about something that he actually asserted as a truth. Now, he did assert that light travels faster through mediums, but he didn't assert it as, I know that to be true. He speculated on a theory of why light diffracted, and he was wrong about the fact that it speeds up. Because everybody, I think, is wrong who thinks speed has something to do with it, actually. But regardless, so how many mistakes do you think Newton actually made? I think in total of the ones he published and said with a certainty, I don't think he made any.
So, whatever argument you put, in the frame of an orthodox, different, non-Newtonian model, he will translate into Newtonian.
Like I said, there is no non-Newtonian model. So again, Newton wasn't wrong about anything. So there's no such thing as a non-Newtonian model. There's just adding to Newton and saying, but there's also this other factor, and there's this other effect. Now, all of your effects are hocus pocus. Okay, all of your effects are photons are bent by gravity. You don't have sufficient evidence to draw that conclusion. Your bent space is what causes the inverse square law. Somehow space contracts because a matter has mass, and that makes space between the stuff contract automatically by some miracle force. The space just disappears somewhere. You know, vacuumed, it's vacuumed away. You don't have hard evidence for any of that existing. None. And yet you talk as if your physics is better than Newton's physics. No, Newton's physics is rock solid. Yours is the mushy, made-up, wooey shit. Yours is quicksand compared to Newton's cement.
Language and say it fails because clearly Newton tells me this. Right? Now, so you can say what...
Again, this has nothing to do with this whole conversation. I haven't mentioned Newton's name. This has nothing to do with Newton. This has to do with whether you perceive something to be a simple object with simple properties. Photons are simple objects with simple properties. They move at the speed of light in a straight line in a straight direction, unless something interferes with them. And that's it. And you're just pretending that isn't the truth. And I think that's just ludicrous. I think the overwhelming evidence is that that's what photons are. And I could play the Feynman clip for the 7th time of Feynman saying they're photons, they're corpuscles, they're particles.
You can say relativity is wrong, quantum mechanics is wrong, blah, 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 blah. But what he can't claim is to be engaging with those models and understanding the answer.
Again, I have engaged with them. I've mocked them thoroughly. I've pointed out how they're ludicrously silly, and they're based on absolutely shitty evidence. The evidence for lensing by gravity is shit.
So it's provided by those models. So it is with relativity. How it was with quantum mechanics, how he insists on framing the question about aiming of electrons through slits. Yeah.
I never usually speak of electrons being aimed at the slit, so that's more rubbish. I always talk about the photon experiments. I'm really not terribly interested in the electron experiments because, frankly, it's a completely different phenomenon. The electrons deflect off of electrons. They don't crash into each other. Photons exchange their full dose of momentum.
So it is with relativity. Relativity says, Newtonian schema for dynamical situations at high speed of light is getting really inaccurate. Right?
So again, there's no evidence that Newton's inaccurate at the high speed of light. So again, they have no proof for these phenomenons they say exist at these speeds no matter can be propelled at. we can't make anything go anywhere near the speed of light, material objects, and so we can in no way test any of this fantasy theories they have about what takes place when things start going those speeds. It's all just their made-up fantasy of what the truth is, a theory of the truth, and there's no evidence to base it on whatsoever. They're just claiming the UFOs are real because who built the pyramids? It's that kind of inference, and that's all it is. It's so thin.
High percentage speed of lights, and we have these calculations and models for how it works, yeah. And in this model, it is still observed and still true. Light goes at light speed. Now, because he can't understand the maths of it and can't understand the analysis.
Yes, well, there's no understanding the maths of it, right? They're just saying that because of their special law, this line and this line are the same length. Even though it's physically impossible that they are, they're just going to claim it is. So they're just going to ignore physics, okay, and go with their fantasy. Yes, you can do anything you want to, and there's no way to experimentally test it and show it's a pile of shit, but it's a pile of shit.
Analogies of it and reconcile it itself, and makes no effort to reconcile it with what's being said. The only thing he can do is translate it into Newtonian assumptions.
I know, I reconcile it. I reconcile it as not being obedient to conservation. The speed of light, the photon had to move faster than the speed of light if you propelled it into the future. If you got it to the future, you made it go faster than the speed of light to do it, because that's the only way it gets there. And I've drawn the drawings, I've pointed it out and argued it all I can argue. You want to make up some fantasy that you can make photons go the wrong way, so at any speed photons automatically behave like baseballs on a bus, and they just acquire the extra speed and move in the new direction. So photons aren't force elements, they're some sort of matter bit that you can give multiple velocities to. That's all you're doing. The only way a baseball works on the school bus, as stated, is because it's matter, and it can acquire more speed. It can move faster, and it can move slower. Photons can't move faster or slower, so you can't play the same stupid game.
And claim that he's treated your theory and shown that it's wrong under his assumptions. Case being, another thing, right? I purposefully reiterated the question and rephrased the claim about no evidence of that DraftScience has. Yeah?
So I have no evidence of what? That 99% of the time photons do exactly what I state they do. They move in a straight line from point A to point B.
Contrary to his constant haranguing of orthodox science not having evidence, he has no evidence. That we say, and that when I say we say, when we're talking about special relativity, that special relativity says two velocities. Yeah? Because special relativity is thrown out.
Right, says two velocities, whatever that means. Yes, clearly you have the more extraordinary claim. I'm just saying you're the one that's saying I'm going to give special properties to these frames, and now the special things can happen that don't have to do anything to do with regular physics. Okay, and photons can go into the future. They can travel more distance. They can do all these special things. They can move faster than a photon normally moves. And that's basically what you're saying. You have the extraordinary claim. My claim is the ordinary claim, saying no, that photons are just photons and you can't play this game with them. So which one requires the more evidence, the extraordinary claim or the ordinary claim? You're not defending anything called physics. You're defending a theoretical notion, but there's no evidence of it. I have 99.99% of the time light does exactly what I illustrate it to do.
Newtonian mechanics. So to argue against, you have to look to what special relativity says, and at the end of his video he concedes that special relativity has, let's call it, a time rework. Okay? And
I don't know, I didn't concede anything, and I'm basically saying that yes, you're violating the speed of light. You sit there and pretend to say that you believe in something called conservation, yet and you believe that the speed of light is always the same, and that you can't fuck with these momentums, and yet that's all you do. You violate the speed of light, and you fuck with the momentum. I mean, change its direction just arbitrarily, like without any explanation of how the photon knows it's supposed to move forward. I'm supposed to go to the future. I know that because I'm a photon and I'm smart. How does the photon know to do that? To not go straight, oh, I'm supposed to go forward because I have two momentums.
Every time, and he does it many times in many different situations, he throws out your theory. Another way he throws it out is when he says, oh, reference frames, I don't need to bother with that. Well, that's the whole...
I'm just saying, personally, I have no use for them, that's right. None of my theory depends on them at all. They're of no value whatsoever. I think they're completely made up. It's complete rubbish, nonsense physics to think there's any such thing as time dilation. I've explained what time dilation is. Time dilation is broken clocks. It has nothing to do with a physical circumstance being different or changed or any of that shit. It just has to do with the fact that radioactive elements decay slower when you move them very fast. That's it. There is no time dilation frames. There is no time warping. You cannot bend time. You cannot break time. Time is as reliable as the photon speed. And you're the ones who don't believe that. You're the ones that think you can break time, you can break photons, you can break anything. You can break any of these fucking fundamental properties of physics. So you lie and sit there and say, I believe in the consistency of the speed of light. And, you know, and you don't. Obviously you don't.
Problem. That's what gives genesis to special relativity, is the consideration of points of view. Observer, external, and observer.
Again, irrelevant to the actual physics. Again, the observer in the bus, where we're throwing the baseball back and forth, perpendicular to the motion of the bus. As observers, we don't see the baseball's real trajectory. We're not seeing it going the wrong way. Alright? So we're oblivious to it. But intellectually, we know that's exactly what's happening. We know that as I throw the ball, you start to move forward. The ball's also moving in that direction. It has that momentum. You can't see it or perceive it because you're moving the same way. So again, it's like catching the egg. You're already preloaded to not see or feel or have any contact with that motion because it's exactly the same as your motion. So it's invisible to you. It doesn't mean the motion doesn't exist. It's just invisible to you. So that's the only broken observer, is the observer who's moving and he can't see the motion because he's moving exactly the same as the thing that's moving. So he can't see that portion of the motion. He can just see this motion. This is the motion he's not doing. He's not jumping from the person back and forth. He can see that motion. He can't see the forward motion because he's also moving forward. So that's invisible. But again, intellectually, everybody knows the baseball actually moves forward, and that if somebody was to catch it on the ground, it would actually be moving faster. It would be faster than the stationary baseball bus. So if we have a stationary bus and you miss the baseball and somebody catches it, they get one kind of impact. If the bus is moving, they get a much stronger impact because the velocity of the baseball is in fact faster. And you just can't see it because you have the same velocity. So it has nothing to, these perceptions have nothing to do with the physical reality. There's one physical reality, not multiple physical realities. And you're pretending because in some frames I can't see it, that somehow it doesn't exist. And that's fucking childish.
On Spaceship X, yeah? There is something to be reconciled, yeah? In Mendham, DraftScience took objection to this trailing image. It was shorthand for this same picture he has drawn to make clear to me what he's saying is happening and will happen, yeah?
Yeah, he says it's shorthand for something, but the point is obviously from the look of it, I'm claiming that somehow photons are bent. So obviously it's overtly inconsistent with my argument that photons always travel in straight lines, always travel in straight lines, always travel in straight lines unless they hit something like an electron. Otherwise they travel in a straight fucking line. So clearly it's not consistent with what I'm saying over and over and emphasizing over and over. So regardless of whether you think it's a simplification based on your God dogma. It's really not fair to look at my evolution through your God glasses.
T0, T1, and a corresponding, yeah? So he has no forgiveness or understanding what I'm trying to represent. I'm not trying to misrepresent him. He's drawn this picture himself.
Not like that, I haven't. So you know, not as incomplete as that. So I'm just saying that's what you put. You're sitting there saying, okay, I didn't mean to do something that looks overtly opposite of everything you've ever said. Okay, fine, you didn't mean it. I'm just saying it doesn't change the fact that that was a misrepresentation of what I say. It's not an accurate representation, and I corrected it. So there, and fine, it's been corrected. Don't use that as a symbol of what I believe, because it's not accurate.
It's all about reference frames. This is from the external point of view, sees this kind of trailing off more so than the with baseballs, which Newtonian mechanics works with, more so than the
inaccurate again. The outside point of view sees photons go in straight lines and not move with anything. They go straight. It doesn't see any curved trailing thing. It sees things hit. Doesn't see anything jumping to the future, bending to the future.
Spaceship X observer. So when you say, oh, I don't take account of reference frames, that's just bullshit. You've just said, contrary to wanting to argue with somebody who's defending special relativity, you're saying you don't want to argue with somebody who's defending special relativity.
I'm pointing out how the evidence for special relativity is ludicrous. I'm pointing out how it's not consistent physics, that it's incompatible with some notion that photons travel at constant speed. So I'm saying, I'm giving you a reason why, in my opinion, this is a non-starter. I've said plainly, if you want to believe it, believe it. But yeah, I might as well be talking to a Muslim, all right? Because there's absolutely no evidence that photons point to the future and that somehow they go faster than the speed of light to go the longer distance that the future requires. The future's further away. It's further away than this line, a lot further away in the case of high speed, and you can't do a longer distance in the same amount of time. That's a basic rule. You don't think it's a basic rule? Fine. We're done. The conversation's over, okay? I'm saying the whole premises of your theory are paradoxical and nonsensical. You think that this happens. You can move an interferometer half the speed of light and somehow the photons still hit the mirror and the mirror still reflects them to the same beam splitter, and that you haven't created any kind of problems at all. No, you've created all kinds of problems. Physical problems.
Because special relativity is all about the reference frames and who measures what, who sees what. Okay? You want to apply Newtonian mechanics to...
Yes, I believe there's one reality that can be described, not multiple realities. So this whole perspective thing is bullshit. There's one physical, actual thing that actually happens and it's describable. That's what I believe physics is. So yes, I don't have anything. What can I say? Again, if you're going to premise every single observation of every experiment on your relativity being a reality, again, Michelson-Morley existed before this notion of frames ever came up. So you're saying that somehow they really invented it. It wasn't invented by Einstein. It was invented by Michelson and Morley.
To special relativity, which is to not scrutinize special relativity, because it's different. You have to look, and you have to be able to firstly to speak about special relativity and understand the answers it provides, and you don't seem capable of that.
I don't see how it's my obligation. These assholes are saying somehow Michelson-Morley was looking for the absolute frame. And I'm explaining how the experiment can't possibly detect it, even if it was detectable, because the experiment can't be moved and create two different lengths. The two lengths end up always being the same. because you're moving both of them. The fact is that any change off of the straight line path will always have the same effect. So whether you go all the way perpendicular or just a little bit, it doesn't matter. You have to account for the distance. And since both of them are moving, both of them end up creating the same time change. Both of the paths end up to be longer, exactly the same amount of time longer. And so the experiment can't work. Now you're saying you can use the frame argument of Einstein's that happened 25 or 30 years after Michelson-Morley, 20 years after or something. You say you can use Einstein's theory to fix the conversation about why Michelson-Morley was wrong. Michelson-Morley was wrong to think their experiment could detect a difference because the two paths were different. And the two paths are not the different length, they're the same length.
So, I made a great point with reason too, but it's amazing what interjection can do to spoil a point. So if I say DraftScience momentum equals what in your paradigm, well, best I can gather, it means light travels in straight lines. Well, that's wrong. That isn't what momentum means.
No, well, the momentum is in the direction the light or photons are traveling. So the direction, you're going to see the direction once there's more than one photon. You can't tell what direction it's going until you have more than one photon. But clearly that's what it does. And you're saying that Michelson-Morley knew that photons are being bent forward as the experiment moves. They don't come out straight out of the light source anymore. They bend and they go a tangential line. And that tangential line, even though it's longer, they can move exactly the same speed of light. So you're saying Michelson-Morley knew before Einstein that the photons are time dilated and that it doesn't matter that the distance is longer because photons can travel longer distances at the same speed because of the magic relativity. I'm saying that obviously Michelson-Morley, if they didn't think that the photons are going straight, all right, and that they thought they were going forward, they thought wrong.
We do believe, as an axiom of special relativity, that light travels in straight lines. We don't believe it under general relativity, taking into account gravitational fields. But
well, was that duplicitous enough? We believe it under one theory and we don't believe it under the other. So I mean, you know, let's just call it contradiction physics then. I mean, what's the fucking point? I mean, it's just, again, we're back to Huygens. Huygens creates two waves with a single slit. Huygens only creates two waves with the double slit. So you have twice as many slits and, hey, the same number of extra little magic photo waves, wavitons. You only get two wavitons with the single slit, and you only get two wavitons with the double slit. So yeah, contradictions are fun. That's what physics is supposed to be. It's full of contradictions. Idiotic, moronic contradictions.
For our purposes, in discussing we take it to be true, that things have singular actual velocities. Well, that isn't the definition of momentum.
It is for a photon. So again, this is a more nonsensical, apples and oranges. For a photon, for any kind of force carrier, for all the electromagnetic spectrum, their momentum is their direction, period. They all have the same mass. They don't change anything else. So their momentum is their vector. Whatever way they're pointing, that's all of their momentum. They don't have anything extra. Now, yes, the new physics, they're inventing spins and stuff, so now they have spinning photons, the anti-spin particle photons. They've invented some nuanced bullshit, but I would argue there's absolutely no evidence for any of that shit existing, so I call it shit, because there's no evidence. I think it's UFO shit.
And so in his video, he proves he doesn't know what orthodox momentum is. Okay, very luckily, I think.
But let's go. He again was saying, you know, how all things are the same. We can talk about photons and we can talk about baseballs, and all of them are the same thing. They're all things that are identical in terms of their physics they obey. when I've clearly made a distinction in my theory between force and matter bits. Completely different. Matter bits can travel multiple speeds and certainly not travel the speed of light, and force bits only do that one thing, the speed of light. And he wants to compare the two things. He wants to say they behave exactly the same. No, they don't behave exactly the same because they're physically different.
I think you can't, you know, but that's the kind of look you get when you constantly interject. Get to obfuscate the point that DraftScience does not know what momentum is. I've made videos explaining what momentum is.
Yeah, and I've made videos responding to your idiotic notions of all this shit. I clearly know what momentum is. It's the impact that something has when it hits something, frankly, period. It's the effect it carries, its potential to affect. But, you know, for you to sit there and say that somewhere I made a mistake in a momentum argument, well, why don't you exactly quote that mistake instead of playing this nonsense game that you have some sort of evidence that I don't know what momentum is? Show me again where I violated conservation, where you actually show evidence of a violation. Not merely you claim it, but you actually show the evidence of the violation of conservation.
Momentum is a number. Momentum is a conserved number, and it is the velocity vector. This is to do with the direction, you see, and that's why it isn't the photon knows to set off at this direction. Yeah, it's that it has its momentum. It's taking a part of the spaceship momentum, and that sets the trajectory. Yeah. Velocity times mass, where there is a mass. Where there isn't, from the E equals mc squared longer version, E mc squared, there's an additional term where it's just a momentum number, right, to do with direction. Now, another thing that gives in all this spaceship observation time clock business is that accounts is that the internal observer might observe original red laser light, but the external observer might see, well, even
yeah, well, why talk about seeing photons? That would be silly. So who cares about that kind of nonsense? We can't observe photons in their function. Okay, photons have to hit our eye. We have to destroy photons to see. So let's not play a game that we can see the photons. That somebody shoots the laser in your eye.
To red light, so to speak. I think it would shift that way. I should say it might say, let's say it starts with a green laser and it'll shift to the red. I think I may have the direction wrong, but the point is valid. Another note. I mean, Eminem makes all these crybaby sounds about liars, right? And you know, what kind of a man offers a $10,000 bet who doesn't have $10,000, right? Why should...
As I've pointed out many times before, I can get $10,000. It's not a problem. I have friends, unlike you, and family that would trust me. I'm good for it. I've never welched on a bet or a debt. So, yeah, I can get the money. It's not a problem. But it's also not a problem because I won't need the money because you people are outrageously silly.
Taken seriously. Yeah. Why should he be taken seriously when he says he's scrutinising special relativity, but he's not? What he's doing is claiming that, just saying, won't believe it, no. Yeah, I'm married to Newtonian mechanics. Well, you can be, but it doesn't fit the experiment.
No, I'm doing what they claim to do. I'm preserving the speed of light and the consistency of light in the sense that it travels in straight lines and it doesn't do this bendy thing for free. They're the ones breaking conservation, and they're the ones destroying the notion that there's anything called a consistent speed of anything, because they can just put it in a frame and change its speed.
Yeah, you go find an experiment that does. Right, so he doesn't have this $10,000, but it just shows that he's all too easy to run his mouth off. And if he does have the $10,000, then he lied when I last said, how are you going to pay for this $10,000 to have a debate with a leading scientist? And he said, well...
I said exactly the same thing. I said, I can get the money. Not a problem. And then I just pay it back. Because I can sell the interview with a named scientist, frankly. I can sell that and make the money back. But like I said, I don't even need to, because once I do that, I win. Once I get a real physics professor to bore a new asshole in, I'm on my road. I'm a made man then. Then I'm really dangerous.
Well, you know, it's got marketing value, you know, and I might be able to sell it, you know, as you know, part of a documentary series or something. You know, it'd have value that he'd hope to recuperate, and the fame that because he's going to so obliterate this leading scientist, his instant fame will credit him with countless dollars. You know, he's taking it out of his Nobel Prize. I think he's spending money he doesn't have. I mean, I call this a great big fat lie.
Oh, so like Einstein did, where, you know, 2 years before he won the Nobel Prize, he gave he used the Nobel Prize money to get a divorce from his wife. Oh, so it's never been done before. Yeah, it has, dumbass.
I shouldn't like to engage with somebody who can't back up what they say, who doesn't have the monies, only promissory notes of fame.
Look, there'll be no promissory notes if you'll take up the challenge, okay, and we can find a agreeable judge. No problem, okay? I'm telling you, I'll get the money. So you get the money, and then let's do the bet, okay? If you think that stupid animation accurately describes even your own dopey theory, okay? It doesn't even describe your own dopey theory correctly, and clearly you can't get away with saying I haven't violated the speed of light. So clearly I can prove that without no trouble at all.
So I thought I'd deal with the other ongoing issue. Right, so because Michelson-Morley experiment, right, splitter, mirrors, screens, etc., he's found a way, and it produces interference fringes like this. He's found a way to basically produce the same pattern of one device, but not simply. I haven't followed the exact details of it. When he says dust, I think he means actually a layer of not dust particles, but a layer of moisture, perhaps. Right?
Anything will do. That's right. Anything that turns into essentially physical particles, obstructions to photons. That is, anything that creates an edge that photons will be deflected by. That's right. Will do.
But is this going to frighten a leading physicist and say, "Oh my God, we never expected that"? No, the very fact whether he's and whether he is exactly.
Again, I'm not looking to surprise anybody. I'm just saying that clearly all of the propaganda, all the talk about interferometers, I've been spending like 3 years watching videos. Nobody ever mentioned it. Then I finally found a professor who was actually talking about the internal reflections in thin films, and that was sort of a giveaway that, oh, this is about something entirely different. And then he showed the pattern being created by just 2 places of plain glass being placed on top of each other, and the light reflecting of the internal reflections, creating a bar pattern. Oh, it didn't create the Newton's ring circle, it created bars of on-off. But these were all little giveaways that this is about something completely different than any silly notion of a straight beam going and then a straight beam moving here and then straight beams going everywhere. These aren't straight beams. These are beams that have been diffracted by slits, and the ones reflected aren't diffracted. And it's this simple difference between the one getting diffracted going through the beam splitter and the one reflecting staying a little beam. It's the very core of the physics of how this thing works, and again, he's just talking about it like it's trivial. It doesn't mean anything. It gets to the core of the function, and he still has no curiosity whatsoever, because he's sure that when I turn that little millimeter knob, I'm changing the wavelength of the light, and I'm measuring 32 nanometers difference. I made something move 32 nanometers. Yeah, sure you did. In your, whatever, half-wet dreams.
Beam splitting with just a mere piece of glass or whatever. Right? The point is this doesn't refute science. This science says if you provide 2 paths and then recombine, you get the interference. So whatever is the experimental setup, of which, you know, there isn't a detailed paper about that.
Yeah, so I mean, it's not important that the pattern was already created before the 2 beams combined. So that's trivial. It has nothing to do with it. So this is how stupid this is, right? They just pretend it's trivial. It's not important. It doesn't matter. Amazing.
And check. I have to listen to his hand-waving explanations, which is hard to follow. But the explanation will be he's set up two paths, and so we're getting interference fringes. Now, this is an interesting experiment to show fringe behaviour, for sure. But what it can't do, it is inferior to the Michelson-Morley's, because I can put a micrometer on here and actually calculate the wavelength with this setup. And
right, you're calculating a formula and extrapolating it into a wavelength. Clearly there's a proportion, a relationship, okay? But the relationship isn't you're moving at 30 nanometers, okay? The fact that you can predict the wavelength, it's like me seeing a tennis ball from 300 meters away, and I can see that it's yellow and it's this, and I can surmise it's a tennis ball, okay? Having a formula that allows you to say it's a tennis ball, okay, doesn't mean that you actually measured that distance. It's just a relationship that's built into the mechanism. But the fact that you think you're cycling through wavelengths, what do you think is happening when you're turning that dial? Say you have to turn it 30 times to move it 1/2 wavelength, is what they say, right? So you go through 30 cycles to get 1/2 of a wavelength difference. How do you think that's possible? I mean, just 20 into the wavelength, the nanometer number, 700 nanometers. Let's say 350, 400 nanometers. 20 into 400 nanometers. So you've cut it down to 10. You're measuring now the wavelength of a X-ray now? You really think you're doing that? Come on.
Ensure that it's not some multiple paths through multiple layers of dust and glass reflections causing the fringes, but actually the distance change.
As I pointed out, all I had to do was tilt the mirror, tiny little changes in the tilt of the mirror, and the pattern cycles in and cycles out fast, like 100 cycles it goes through, just a tiny little tilt in the mirror. Yes, it's a sensitive instrument, but it's not measuring the half wavelengths of fucking light.
And from that distance change, I can infer, and the cycling of the fringes, I can infer the wavelength with this setup, and I can demonstrate that it is distance change, not, see, this could just be magic. Yeah? You don't show anything other than magic to...
Whatever. I didn't say anything about magic. I haven't had time to fully analyze what I have discovered, and I said that right in the video. I said I don't clearly know exactly why there's this other beam here and this one here. This is one kind of diffraction. This is another kind. Why are the two not lined up? I don't have explanations for all those things yet, but I'm going to get to them. And the point is this already opens a huge door of other explanations besides some wacky notion that two beams need to go through this whole rigmarole so then you can combine them. And again, why don't you say it overtly right to my face, that you actually believe the photon goes into the beam splitter and it creates two wavetons, let's call them wavetons, right, wave packets, and the wave packets go the two different lengths, and then the wave packets combine to create the interference pattern. So go ahead and tell me, where do you think this happens? Is it a single photon that spreads into two wavitons and then recombines? Or are they individual different photons that go different paths, and the individual different photons somehow have their wave function interfere? Why don't you tell me what you think this stupid device does? I mean, I can't really analyze your theory if you're not willing to express it. What is your theory? Draw it on a piece of paper where this photon stops being a corpuscle, as Feynman would say, becomes some whatever things, wavy things flying through space, and then those wavy things are recombined into a photon. Why don't you show me where it goes from photon to wavy thing and then back into photon again?
Somebody in 1817, 1800s, 1900s, this experiment, no, not 1900s, this is just, an interesting piece of magic. With this experiment, you demonstrate it is path length that is causing it, and we calculate the wavelength of the light, and
Yeah, well, again, it's always going to be proportional, the wavelength. So clearly, it's not a great mystery that you're able to calculate the wavelength of the light because it's a set instrument that has proportional movements. So yes, why would there be some other expectation? You can calculate the wavelength of the light using the single slit or the double slit experiment. It doesn't mean that the experiment itself is creating wave packets that have little tiny fluctuations in their distance, and you're measuring that distance.
Going back, yeah, that's this for light, this extra term, whatever it is, PV. There's a it's where the momentum is given by the frequency times something or other. I don't know. I can't remember.
So yeah, that's another piece of conventional physics that I'd like to debate with one of you people, with this idiotic notion that frequency equals momentum, when I don't think there's any evidence that that's true at all. That there's just a circumstantial fact that, as I pointed out, the tipping point argument is perfectly valid. Same exact bullets. You fire one bullet and this tips, and then you fire another bullet and this tips. Nothing happens. You fire two bullets, whoop, tips, and then you fire the second one real quick and it tips over. Two different effects. One of them clearly a different physical effect from exactly the same amount of energy going in. So again, this whole momentum thing, as if there's direct causal relationships between how matter reacts. No, matter has resonance. It has all kinds of different properties, and those properties will dictate how sensitive it is to certain frequencies. So again, this idiotic notion that somehow frequency is directly related to velocity, or velocity is related to frequency, is just stupid. Again, another evidence to how they don't believe in the speed of light, the consistency of the speed of light, or force.
Well, it's easy enough to look up. So that's done, yeah. And undoubtedly, DraftScience will be able to parse through this and strawman it to death without going, right, I'll tell you what momentum is. It's this, and they'll be like, well, that's not our momentum. You can make a name up for it. It's just called.
Well, again, your name is just as your definition of it is a vector in a whatever blah blah space isn't saying anything. Clearly, momentum has to do with how much capacity something has to create effect. So it's a measurement of potential cause. How much cause is built into something, and that's what momentum is. I mean, this thing has a ton of momentum when it's standing still, because the way it was constructed was a whole bunch of energy going all kinds of vectors created it in the first place, and they're still conserved inside of it. Asshole.
It's just called light bits don't
E equals mc squared, retard.
You see how it does it? I've explained this too. If you had a spaceship going a velocity, if light isn't conserving momentum, orthodox momentum, if light is trailing off, then this.
So he said trailing off again. So he's just going to keep on doing this trailing off thing. And again, no, you're the one saying it goes to the future. The light knows to go to the future. Go to the future. Go forward, young man. Go forward, young man. All right, I'm the one saying the light goes straight. It doesn't trail off anywhere. It goes straight. You're the one saying it goes to the future, and it travels a further distance to get there. So you're misparaphrasing. This is a deliberate misparaphrase. So don't keep pretending, oh, I'm just accidentally completely butchering a fair description of what you stated over and over again, which is light goes in perfectly straight. It can't trail off. And you just did it again. And why don't you draw what your image of it is? It goes forward. The light goes forward. You're the ones who think it doesn't go straight. It bends with velocity. It bends in the direction of the velocity. That's what you believe.
It's momentum because it's losing mass. Energy at E equals mc squared would actually slow down.
It's not losing any mass, it's just a pile of crap. Of course, anything that shoots photons is losing mass, retard. Anything. Anything that shoots photons loses mass. The sun loses mass because it shoots photons. Anything shooting photons loses mass. Mass is energy, you retard. For fuck goddamn sake, you don't know that everything on the electromagnetic spectrum is energy? Everything is. Shit for brain. You have to convert mass into the photons, dumb fuck.
So that's why I say it's not the count of photons or about the straightening, it's about the conservation of this vessel as well. It would slow down.
So he doesn't know. I've already made this argument 3 times at least. He doesn't think if you had a powerful enough laser, you could use the laser to move your spaceship. As little turning boosters. Of course you could. If you had gigahertz of laser power and you shot out one side of your ship will move. Yes, it'll happen. Equal but opposite reaction. It's just hard to make enough energy into photons. Most of the time we had all the losses to heat. So now that we have these little LEDs and other mechanisms that are much more efficient at creating light, that is just photons without heat, we can create a lot more photons, a lot higher energy of photons. But the truth is, photons are a tiny amount of energy compared to all the other forms of radiant energy that are in the form of non-visible tons, like infrared spectrum and the ultraviolet spectrum have a ton more energy in them. They're thicker.
The only way it doesn't slow down is if light leaves with the momentum term at the speed of light still. But it's the hypotenuse, it never gets there. It gets there.
Yeah, it gets there by the magic of I can go more distance and I can violate the speed of light. That's all. The only way it gets there, it has to violate the speed of light. They don't care. It's a bullshit that they profess any regard for these principles at all. They have no regard for them at all. When I said ultraviolet light, no, there isn't. Ultraviolet light isn't denser. The energy gets denser the lower you go down. Is when it gets thicker and thicker and thicker. It gets thinner as you go higher. But there's a ton of energy in the form of infrared radiation.
Time, you measure it, your time, it gets there, it travels straight, the outside observer sees it, sets off, as you put it, knowing where to be, yeah? And he sees it at one frequency, yeah, and at the speed of light, all fitting in his reference frame, and the spaceship observer.
So just understand, he did draw it straight ahead, goes forward into the future, so let's just understand he's the one that says light doesn't go straight, it goes crooked, and that it travels this longer line, which means more distance, and exactly the same time it would take it to go straight up and down. So he's saying this line, the light does this in the same time it took to do this. Which obviously means the light had to go faster than the speed of light.
Sees it, yeah, time shrinks, distances shrink, all according to the Lorentz transformations, all works out. Now you can just say bollocks, that's fine. But don't pretend that Newtonian scrutiny is scrutiny of, when in fact really all you're saying is bollocks. And the reason you're saying bollocks is A, you don't understand it, B, you don't understand the experimental evidence, and it's just, as you say at the end of your video, I have no...
No, I'm just saying there's no way you can't even use Lorentz to contract this distance when you're going the forward length. So I'm just saying you can't fix it. You can pretend you fix it, but you don't. There's no way to fix it. You're having it shoot into the future, and the future is farther away. And again, as I pointed out in the specific example of the interferometer being moved, you can't even hit the mirror in the place you need to hit it to bounce it back to the beam splitter. You can only hit the mirror forward of that location, and so you're already fucked. None of this happens. It's all just made up.
Evidence that photons coming out of a gun behave this way, carrying momentum. Yeah. I just believe it. It's your religion. It's your faith.
Yes, right. I'm the one saying the bullets come out of the gun straight. He's the one saying you can hook the bullet. So let's just understand who's got the extraordinary claim and who should have the better evidence. He has no evidence to back up any of this mush as being anything called the truth. It's just a bunch of reworking, like the religious people do, reworking reality, find excuses. Why did God put those fossils in the ground? Oh, it's a test to make sure you're faithful and you're devoted. It was just there to, it's the Satan put the bones there. You know, they just come up with rationalizations, excuses to make it work. Some dark matter, throw a little dark matter in, throw a little dark energy in, a little Higgsy thing here or there, some gluons and pooons, throw in a few, you know, fermions and fermions. It's all just made up shit.
That's denying your ability to scrutinize special relativity. End of.
Yeah, I can't scrutinize a completely made up fable for which there's no physical evidence. Beyond saying it's a made up fable and there's no physical evidence. That should be enough of an argument to make. It's made up and there's no evidence. Okay. Fuck. People are just this pathetic. I always knew people were dumb, but I didn't realize they were this fucking dumb. I mean, this has been such a dismal education to realize just how fucking stupid you people are. Oh, man. I might as well buy myself a baby chimp and see if I can get it to learn some language, sign language enough. And I'd be better off having a conversation with that chimp than you idiots.